are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our next edition of the Cannabis Clinicians Club, the Dr. Mary Show. You're meeting with me today with somebody who's working in a very powerful field of medicine in the emerging, I don't even know if we can really call it an emerging arm of medicine anymore, in genomics and cannabis, Mr. Len May. And I thought rather than putting you through a boring of me reading the biography to you, I would just ask Mr. May to introduce himself.
Yeah, I like that better. And thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Because sometimes I have to introduce people and it's like you're reading this bio. And I'm like, yeah, I'm falling asleep through that. So, yeah, I mean, my background's I've been in the cannabis space for over 25 years. I started as a patient and then I became an activist. I was the president of the Cannabis Action Network. So I'm from Philadelphia and I moved to Los Angeles about 13 years ago. And I got into the dispensary business because I thought that was the best way for me to be able to help as many people as possible with cannabis as medicine. And one of the challenges that I kept seeing over and over was two people would come in with the same exact symptomatic condition and they would consume the same cultivar and have a completely different experience. So in doing so, just trying to figure out, and I have ADD. So my type of ADD is like either I'm multitasking or I can hyper focus on something that really stimulates me. So I started this mission and trying to figure out why is this happening. And I thought it had a lot to do with the plants themselves, meaning that they give these plants, these cultivars or strains, as people refer to, all these kind of names. And so I came across a video by a guy named Kevin McKernan, who's one of the first people to genetically sequence cannabis. Long story short, I reached out to Kevin, started working with a company called Medicinal Genomics. And my job was to travel around the US and Canada and get plant material from different plants, bring it back to my lab, extract the DNA, purify and send it to Boston to a sequencer. So that way we can see if we're getting these cultivars, let's say it's called Blue Dream. We find 5 Blue Dreams and
Yeah.
2 of them are kind of identical genetically. 2 other ones are crosses, so we can see there's Blue Dream in them, and the 5th one is not even close. So in creating this library, we started seeing that these plants with different names don't really mean anything. And the parent company was called Cortigen Life Sciences, and they were a pharmacogenomics company. So they did genetics for all kinds of different diseases, so cancer, autism, epilepsy. And we had a meeting at Harvard Medical with physicians that were treating kids with epilepsy using cannabis. And a lot of them were having great success. I'm sure everybody heard the stories, Charlotte and Charlotte's Web and all this other stuff. So they were saying 100 seizures to 0, but then other doctors were saying they had some outliers. So it wasn't working for them or the seizures were coming back. So when we looked at the genotype information of these specific kids or this cohort, we started seeing biomarkers in common, and it was a specific form of epilepsy, Dravet's or Dravet syndrome. So we published an article on that, and I happen to have found out later that GW Pharmaceuticals kind of shifted their focus from Sativex to Epidiolex as a product because they can hone in specifically on a biomarker. So this kind of gave me that light bulb moment, that aha moment when I said, okay, we have plant DNA here and we have human DNA here. Let's see if we can bring the two together to give somebody or individuals a personalized experience with their endocannabinoid system and being able to sort of use this as a GPS so they can avoid these sharp corners, these adverse events, and have a much more optimal experience with their phytocannabinoid use.
So the shift to Epidiolex was because of a biomarker?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more reasons, but because you could be specific. So the more specific you get, and I'm not an FDA consultant or anything like that, so I'm just prefacing that. But when you're dealing with clinical research, clinical trials, the more specific you can get, the better chance you have on approval. So if we're looking at a broad category of epilepsy, or you're looking at a specific type of epilepsy where you can measure directly with biomarkers, you can express better efficacy in your cohort if you're conducting a trial or a study. So the more precise that you can get, the better precision therapeutic you can offer, the better outcome potentially you can get for your studies. So that's the way they kind of looked at it. And that's the way we look at Endo DNA as sort of the way to use us, and the company launched in 2017. But the way we look at us is sort of as your GPS, right? So as your ways of cannabis. People compare us to like 23andMe, and that's great. And we'll take that. But I think we see ourselves more as a guide. So, and the reason why I like to use Waze as an example is because it shows you this road over here has a traffic jam. Maybe there's an accident over here. Take this road. It doesn't guarantee there's not going to be a pothole along the way. But the one thing that's really good about it is they give you a thumbs up. Is there still a broken down car? Is still a pothole? So that's the way we work as well with a feedback loop. So when we give you your genetic predisposition, we look at your epigenetic response, whatever formulation or whatever protocol that you're going to consume, it feeds back into our system with biometric feedback devices like the one I'm wearing now, for example, et cetera. So it shows us the efficacy based on genotypes. So we can see.
So you're able to study not only just based on the genomes, but also based on the epigenomes. You're able to assess somebody's epigenetic. Which is so the difference for the people who are watching the show is that that your DNA is your DNA. It's the double helix. It's the strand of data that basically delivers the individual. But then the epigenetics are impacted by diet and lifestyle, by your sleep, by your relationships, and you hydroxylate and methylate the DNA, and then it most people believe that the epigenetic material is even more powerful than the basic genetics, because you can really direct the DNA to do a lot of illogical things when you surround it by Twinkies and no exercise and terrible relationships and a lot of cigarette smoking. Or if you give the DNA this great data, then, that's how come somebody looks at somebody and says, I can't believe they're 50, So your DNA is responding to all of these details all the time, but you can direct your recommendations for patients to the epigenetic material, because I hadn't heard that was possible before.
Yeah, I mean, you explained it really, really well. So the DNA is, your predisposition. The feedback comes in many different ways. So feedback we can get from your other biomarkers, so your blood markers, you see reactive protein levels, et cetera. We also have, as I said, a biometric device that looks at, oxygen levels. It depends what we're looking specifically, heart rate, everything else. So think of it as a Fitbit on steroids, and that collects data as well, provides us all that. Plus, we have a concierge service that actually speaks to individuals on a monthly basis. So we have patient-reported outcome. We have frictionless feedback through biometric information, as well as we're not at methylation paths, but that's what the future is of real epigenetic research that we're doing. So we're taking all this data, clustering it, and starting to create sort of a profile based on archetypes as well.
Okay, so you're doing the genetics, and then you're following sort of what a person might be feeding into the epigenetics by integrating with the person's Fitbit.
Yeah, it's not the Fitbit. It's a proprietary device that we have. Through a different device. Yeah, through a device, as well as patient-reported outcomes. So interviews on a monthly basis with our with our participants, with our customers. So all that creates data points for us, and then we can get better and better in our suggestions. So we use AI, deep learning, to get more honed in.
Yeah, because I don't understand how genetics is working to identify different strains. I mean, based on what you said, like going back to Blue Dream, that if you take 5 Blue Dreams from across the country, you've got 5 different Blue Dreams.
Yeah.
So that can explain the way that Blue Dream might behave differently from one person to another. And then, of course, each individual has different levels of serotonin and norepinephrine, and have different levels of anxiety and stress on the day that they're working on. I mean, how much do you think those types of things are contributing to the experience that somebody is having when they're using their cannabis? Because, like the New York Times, I mean, a number of excellent researchers have really negated the personalized nutrition, that the whole idea of going to your genome and extracting what you should be eating is really not necessary. I mean, we know that people need to drink water and eat whole grains and beans, but that people don't do it. The issue is more of how to get people to do it. But the whole idea of personalized nutrition probably doesn't add a tremendous amount of value in terms of honing in on your vitamins. So I'm really skeptical about personalized cannabis.
Yeah. I don't look at it as personalized cannabis. I look at it as a personalized approach to your endocannabinoid system, right? So we have a hard time measuring endogenous endocannabinoids because there's a variability on anandamide levels based on what you're doing in the moment. So because anandamide is released as a regulatory type of neurochemical, the levels of anandamide differ from individual to individual at a given moment. So what we want to look at is other genes that are associated with your endocannabinoid system that can actually impact that. And I disagree wholeheartedly about looking at DNA as a guide for nutrition. I think it's extremely, extremely important because some people don't do really well with lectin. We should all probably avoid some, but some people are more predisposed to that, especially like even looking at, people who are lactose intolerant, people who are gluten intolerant, et cetera. We can tell all those things looking at your genetic markers.
So to give you an example, we use the genetic markers, though. I mean, it's very easy to identify glucose intolerance by just a simple blood test. And we can usually identify lactose intolerance. I mean, that's difficult to diagnose just purely genetically. You really have to look at the lifestyle. A lot of people with lactose intolerance can still tolerate a quarter cup of dairy or a slice of cheese where the lactose has been, largely.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
A lot of food intolerances, we go back to giving people a restricted diet and then adding food back in and seeing. Yeah. So I don't think that the DNA has been really helpful for diet personalization.
Well, it should be because DNA gives you that blueprint. So if you're able to avoid those things in the beginning, if your DNA has a predisposition for it, then you can avoid actually the expression, the epigenetic expression of those biomarkers. So let's use an example of FA, right? So fatty acid amide hydrolase. So for your audience, just so everybody's aware, it produces an enzyme that actually breaks down anandamide. So I'm going to defer, and I'm not a doctor.
So in cases of, if you're thinking about some people who say that they get high and they stay high for 4 hours, and other people get high and they have to smoke again in 2 hours, that may be a difference in the fatty acid amine hydrolase levels in that person, and a couple of other key enzymes.
Yeah, a lot of key enzymes like that. You're looking at CNR1, you're looking at Phi, you're looking at AKT1. So I'll give you an example where genetics can actually guide somebody to avoid an adverse event. And you mentioned metabolic function, and we're looking at metabolic function, all the cytochrome P450 markers, right? So we're looking at CYP2C9, for instance, that produces an enzyme that metabolizes THC. So it's not necessarily the anandamide marker of FA, but it's metabolic function. So I'll give you an example of an experience that I just had recently with a reporter. So this woman just interviewed me. It was probably about 4 or 5 months ago. And the article wasn't published, but I kind of forgot about it. And I got an email, said, "I'm so sorry, I was delayed on it. I had an episode that you forewarned me about, or your test forewarned me about." And what happened? She goes, I had a psychotic episode. I'm like, oh. And she was really upset because she couldn't consume cannabis anymore, and she didn't want to go back to her medication, et cetera, because she was getting cannabis prescribed for her condition. She's got a medical condition. So I went back and looked at her report. Number one, she was a homozygous, genotype on Fa. So what that means is that she produced more Fa, and which actually broke down less anandamide. So this is the situation in her case and just specific case. So if you have a stressful event, and once again, I'll defer. I'm not a doctor, so if I'm saying something that's out of school, please correct me. But if you have a stressful event, you have a bunch of neurochemicals that are pumped into your bloodstream. You have some adrenaline, you have some norepinephrine, you have some cortisol, etc. Now, when your brain realizes there's no lion chasing the jungle, it starts getting you back to more of a homeostasis, more of a balanced approach. So how it does that, one of the things it does is it releases other neurochemicals, and one of them happens to be anandamide. So if that's the case, it releases anandamide, and you have a average amount of anandamide that's released based on the amount of FA that you produce, then you should be in good shape. But if you're producing less anandamide because you're homozygous in FA, then that cortisol the reuptake of that cortisol doesn't happen as quickly as the average person. So over time, that cortisol level can actually lower your pH level, make you more acidic. So what people have reported to us is, and we have a correlation between that they start feeling some inflammation, especially in their joints, because they're more acidic. And if they have predispositions to IBD, which we can tell with genetics as well, it starts moving into your gut health. So one of the ways they can subsidize that is, and I'm sure many people in the audience know, if you consume THC, it'll bind to your CB1 receptor and help to stimulate the expression of anandamide, since it mimics the two. And if you're able to get that and subsidize what you're missing, that will be sufficient. However, if a person is predisposed to stress reactivity, slower fear extinction, etc., which we can also tell from genotype, then in the biphasic nature, it can actually do the opposite. So if somebody consumes higher amounts of THC with different terpene profiles, it can actually turn on the expression of stress reactivity. So this person
So what you're talking about is somebody who's under either mild, chronic stress or significant acute stress that has depleted, their cortisol and their, the body is maintained in a very tight pH, but that's at a cellular level, you can see pH modifications that can have major impacts on health. So over time, chronic stress over time is going to deplete the cortisol. I mean, and we know that people who are chronically stressed, who have difficulty managing stress, I mean, we know that we can do a series of biochemical markers before we put soldiers into war, and we can see which soldier is going to develop PTSD or which one is going to fire their gun and which one is just going to stand there shocked and not be able to fire their gun. And we know that the body creates the anandamide, and we know that these endocrine systems communicate with each other. It's just that it would, I think it would make sense without ever having to look at the genomic system, that somebody who's under chronic stress and who's dealing with a lot of chronic anxiety is not going to be able to tolerate very much THC. I mean, I feel like you could get to that point without ever needing to run genomic testing on them, do you think that oftentimes you get more data from the interviews and from the Fitbit rather than from the actual DNA sequencing?
Not really. I think what it does, it helps to validate. So if you have a predisposition to some of these conditions, so as the reporter I was talking about, she had a perfect storm, right? She has, on FA, she's homozygous, and she's prone to stress reactivity and slower rate of fear extinction. So she had an anxiety event.
So she had the enzyme that breaks down the anandamide at higher levels than other people.
Right. So the second part of that,
setting of anxiety, she isn't going to be able to rely on her body's natural endocannabinoid system to help pull her out of it and restore homeostasis. She's
you're absolutely correct.
Stay hyperactive for longer than most people.
Right. So the second part of that is a gene called AKT1, which is associated with a psychosomatic event. So a dissociative experience, so psychosis. And she also experienced that because that predisposition was also triggered and epigenetically expressed. So the third part, that's the third part of the second part of that is she was also a poor metabolizer of THC through her digestive system. So because she consumed her cannabis through her first pass, the liver converted to 11-oxyhydroxide, she had a slower metabolic function. So the onset was slower and much more powerful. So the combination of her stress level, the combination of being a poor metabolizer, and that dissociative genetic predisposition, all those were epigenetically expressed, and she was hospitalized for for psychosis, basically. And going back to that, she was super concerned that she was not going to be able to take her cannabis. So when we went through her report again, we said, okay, number one is maintaining having an agonist like CBD instead of taking an edible that is a distillated THC. That's one of the ways that you can try to avoid that. Also, different terpene profiles and method of consumption, sublingual versus first pass. So when she was able to consume that, she wrote me, I thought it was a really nice email. She said, "Thank you for allowing me to be me again." And that's the whole goal, is to empower. This is not the holy grail. This is enough information for you to be empowered to have a conversation with your healthcare professional that is an enlightened conversation. So the more you know about your own genetic predispositions, the better conversation you can have. And we also look at drug interaction. So we look at prescription medications that interact with cannabinoids, and things, some of them are inducers, some of them are inhibitors. So understanding, and once again, deferring, we have doctors who work with us. So deferring to healthcare professionals that are going to be able to tell people, first of all, I'm not a big fan of consuming your prescription medication with your phytocannabinoids anyway. You should be able to take your prescription medication if you're doing so and stagger your consumption. How long do you wait for? Well, it depends on your metabolic function. What kind of metabolizer you are. Are you an ultra rapid metabolizer? Like for me, I'm an ultra rapid metabolizer of CBD. So I have to take 2 to 3 times the amount that's suggested in order for me to have an effect. On THC, I'm an intermediate metabolizer. So I actually know what the amount of milligrams that's right for me, and not to go over those milligrams to avoid those adverse events.
But if somebody came to you and said, I took an edible and I had a psychotic break, or I felt absolutely terrible on taking the edible, and it took longer, it was, then the next thing you would do is do everything that you're saying. You would go through and choose a product that was higher in CBD. You'd give them more control over the administration by using a sublingual or inhalation method. I mean, I think that you can get an idea of what the genome is doing based on what somebody's response is. I'm just not really sure that genome sequencing was particularly helpful in that case.
Yeah, I don't disagree with
cannabis, you. When you're thinking about starting cannabis on a patient, you're going to go with a product that people tolerate very well and give them, a lot of control by using inhalation or sublingual rather than a high dose of an edible. And then, and that way you're giving them the best chance at having a high level of success. I mean, recognizing too that we don't know if they're having like a high anxiety day, or if they're having a day where they didn't get much sleep and they're not eating well. They're just going to have a different response to the product.
Yeah, well, you're an educated physician too, and a healthcare professional. So when you're making those recommendations to your patients, it makes a lot of sense. There's very few people that have that level of knowledge. And the idea is to provide this as a tool for healthcare professionals to use, and also to help people that don't know this or don't have the guidance to avoid those sort of potholes in the road. So yeah, I agree with you. Once we get to a point where we have enough healthcare professionals that are super educated in the endocannabinoid system and understand these experiences, perhaps this combined with the epigenetic response may be something that becomes a standard. But in the meantime, we want to help as many people as possible, because look, Grandma Mary, who's in an assisted living facility, who's, we had this happen as well, who had an edible and had a really bad experience. She went around and told everybody else in her facility, stay away from the devil's lettuce. And if we can avoid grandma having that experience, perhaps she will then
Yeah.
tell everybody that it's a good.
I mean, I hear that comment all the time that you could avoid a bad experience with an edible by genomic testing, but you can avoid a bad experience with an edible by avoiding the edible. I mean, probably the experience was more related to the mechanism or mode of administration rather than to the genetics of the individual, because virtually everybody I know who uses edibles has had a bad experience with their edibles.
Yeah, I never did personally.
And then one of my concerns with using well, you're a remarkable person. One of my concerns with with using these, sequencing and then really bringing people into these very particular products is that we just don't have, we just, a lot of times we can't find the product. So if we have a person, for example, who is interested in getting Dr. Grinspoon's or wants to get a headband because that's the strain that has been defined as their strain, good luck trying to find it. And then we have a person who wants to try cannabis and who would be, a good candidate, but then we have them going down some rabbit hole looking for like a particular strain. How does your genomic sequencing handle that?
Yeah, so it's a really, really good point and good question. The way that it works is, once you have a suggested ratio, so the way that the report comes out, it's a combination of a ratio of cannabinoids, and we have peer-reviewed references for everything, and your primary and secondary terpene profile. Then what we do is we take certificates of analysis from products that are provided to us. We run that through an algorithm, and we show you what the percentage of matches for that specific product, and then we geofence that product based on your location to see where that product is located. So if it's a product that's 0.3% THC or less, it's a product can be purchased. We don't sell products, but through our marketplace. If it's a product that has THC or 0.3% THC or more, it depends on the state. So we have links to different products based on our CFAs, and that you're able to get the product that closely matches you based on your location as well. One of the challenges that we've been having is not every product is tested for their terpene profiles. So we really feel that should be standard. That way we'll get better matching through using our algorithm. But it definitely takes people and we stay away from strain names because I don't think that makes any sense whatsoever. We look at the profile and the ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes, like I said.
Trying to get people to the right cannabinoids and terpenes. What about the minor cannabinoids? Do you have any interest in balancing the minor cannabinoids for your clients?
Oh, absolutely. We have a ton of interest. The challenge is that there's no, and I hate using this because it's been used against us so many times, but we decided that we have to have peer-reviewed references in everything that we do because we're involved in clinical trials and studies as well. So when there are minor cannabinoid references in PubMed that we can actually point to, even if they're in vitro studies, then we'll start including those. And we're waiting for those. The system is built to include everything, but right now the research is on THC and CBD, and then there are like terpene profiles, but minor cannabinoids and acid molecule as well. Minor cannabinoids just haven't gotten to that point yet.
But there are some. You have that much research on terpenes?
We have more research on certain terpenes than others. Like we have research on beta-caryophyllene having CB2 affinity, and there's reference to those. So there's some terpenes that have more research than others, but we as an industry, I'm sorry?
Pretty soft, I feel like still as an industry.
Everything is soft.
But I mean, everything, yeah, even
we were this is for a reason, right?
Research on those.
Right. There's a reason why all the research is soft. It's because it was done with intent. We do not have clinical trials, human clinical trials on a lot of these cannabinoids. And there's reasons for that. And there was a lot of reasons for that, which we all know. I'll give you an example. I was contacted by a research facility in New York that is NIDA approved to do a study. They're doing an autism study. And they're doing an autism study looking at CBDV. And they wanted a chain of custody on an isolated CBDV, which I was able to locate for them, through my findings. And then they came back and they said they can't use it because the Department of Defense is sponsoring the study. I said, okay, so what? That's fine. What do we need to do to be able to, apply, or what do we need to do? What does the Department of Defense need to do? They said, it's not that. They have an exclusive contract with GW Pharmaceuticals to provide their minor cannabinoid isolate. I said, oh, well, that makes sense. So they're providing them the CBDV for their study. So that's, there's a lot of other things that are going on that are preventing us from doing, the clinical research that we need to do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, the prohibition is really limited clinical research. And at this
Right.
point, it's going to be difficult to really get any research in any of the cannabinoids or minor cannabinoids or hemp-derived concentrates, just because the money has to be so, there's so much money that has to be put in place. But I don't feel like we know less about the minor cannabinoids than we do about the terpenes.
Well, once again, it's not what we know, it's the references that are available to us within our findings and our research. Our neuroscientific team looks for that all the time. I mean, we probably, some of the biggest challenges we have as our science team is we build a platform that looks for research. So your reports are always being updated with new research. And as the research comes in, it's programmed to do so. We have our science team that actually physically goes to the research and signs off whether we're going to use that or not. And so far, we haven't found enough research on minor cannabinoids that were referenced and are peer reviewed for us to be able to include those. And as they become available, we want to include everything.
I'm going to be really curious to see how it all plays out, because I think the balancing of the minor cannabinoids may end up being more important in the long run than the terpenes.
You may be right. Minor cannabinoids are absolutely important. Why are we not researching, CBG as much as we should be? It's a precursor cannabinoids. So that I completely agree with you. But we definitely have seen really good studies on beta caryophyllene. We've seen some really good studies on linalool as well that helps lessen the anxiety that may be provoked by THC. And I think as we continue to do research internationally, I mean, Dr. Ethan Russo and us, we just published a study on cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome that's on PubMed. And we started seeing, genetic patterns in our cohort under that. We have a study that's ongoing with Harvard that we're doing, and we're genotyping everybody. So we're looking at sleep genetics, for instance. So all this stuff is just getting us research back. We're doing a study with CU Boulder as well. And it's sort of like you said, I think, Mary, like 23andMe, right? So when they first started, they said, we have references for, you have a predisposition to caffeine, poor caffeine metabolism. And they would reference, it's a study that showed that. It's not actionable, but they would reference that. But now they said, well, it's the reference that we have, plus the 3 million people that reported an outcome. So now we can tell you that specifically, it's not only, a research link to somebody else's research, but internally that patient-reported outcome had validated or provided that information. So the more users we have in our system, the better the suggestions and recommendations.
Oh, definitely, because like even in relation to the hyperemesis syndrome, and that's the syndrome I'm sure most of the listeners are aware of, where people get nausea and vomiting, intractable, very difficult to treat nausea and vomiting related to cannabis administration. And you found that genetic link, which tells us that genetic link is found in a higher propensity in this group, but it still doesn't tell us why they're vomiting. Are they vomiting because that genetic predisposition is giving them a hyper response to a particular minor cannabinoid in cannabis, or is it because there's a excessive amount of motility in the gut that is stimulated when they have that, or is it because it's creating a decreased motility in the lower part of the colon, which always leads to increased nausea? I mean, we still really don't know exactly why. And we also, I don't think we've taken 1 million people and checked all of them and then found that particular genetic code in 254 other people who aren't being sick with nausea, so it's a good start. It's a good start.
Everything is a good start, and you're right. And we did have control. We treated it. It was under an IND, and we treated it just like we would a clinical study. It's more or less related to vagus nerve stimulation and cyclical vomiting syndrome association. But it's not just one gene, and you're absolutely correct. Where in genetics, it's never just one thing. It's a combination of various things. So we can see that in our cohort, based on our controls, most of the people that reported symptoms had these 4 markers in common. And that's the P value. That's what we're looking at. And you're absolutely right that this is just a small cohort. What we need to do is look at this and say, can we expand this to a sponsored study where we can get 1 million people or even 100,000 people? And that's the way we want to conduct research in general. Everything is may be, could be, but we're giving you all the science that we can. The only way that we can verify that, it's an individual experience. I look at everything as it's personalized because we can look at archetypes, but it's not individualized. Individual is you and I are completely different. So even if I have a genetic predisposition for that, what I consume and how my epigenetics are triggered is going to be different from individual to individual. And we're working towards that, but we're in the beginning stages.
So we're getting close on time here. We have like maybe 6 or 7 minutes. So, and I wanted to walk the listeners through the experience of actually going through this. If this is something that you're interested in, do you have like an average price point that this goes at? And then how is the genetic material collected? And then is the genetic material shared beyond your company? And in what way, what kind of protection do people have with that?
Yeah. So we have 2 ways that you can get your DNA kit. Or your DNA results. One of them is using our Endo DNA kit. You can go to endodna.com. It's $199 retail, and you can buy it on the site or your physician's office if they carry it. And the way that it works is we're HIPAA and GDPR compliant. You would get the kit. It's a buccal swab, like a big Q-tip. You would swab the inside of your mouth. You will register it because if you do not register the kit, we will not know that DNA belongs to you. We are on Amazon's AWS. We're also HIPAA compliant on Amazon's AWS. I'm not a tech guy, but whoever's listening that understands S3 buckets, basically your personal information resides on one side, your DNA resides on the other side. It's encrypted. You have the decryption key when you log into your secure portal. That information becomes available to you. I do not know. I can't look up somebody's DNA. So that's one way to do it. Also,
that's really good news because 23andMe has been cooperating with law enforcement all along. And I don't know that everybody who signs up actually really thinks or knows or understands that their DNA is now sort of a matter of public record.
I think maybe our goals are different. For us, I don't really care about Len May's personal information. It means nothing to me. The idea is to get, thousands of people with the same genotype. So yes, we do gather information, but it's not personal information. It's efficacy data. So 1,000 people with this genotype have reported efficacy based on the product they took. Now their system learns the patient-reported outcome, the efficacy for this type of profile. So that's why it's really important for us to get feedback and data, but not your personal data, because we don't intend to market or sell personal data, because that's not our business model.
Because in the end, your business model is really the product.
Well, it's either products, which we have IP on certain products as well, or it's guiding. At the end of the day, we want to guide people to an optimal experience with their cannabis use. So it's our products, other people's products, so we can kind of give the industry an indication of what's more efficacious for different archetypes. That's
which is really helpful for like, what seeds am I going to put in the ground this year?
Exactly. That's exactly it.
If we're telling a lot of people that they need 9-pound hammer, then you need to put that seed in the ground.
You're absolutely right. So the second way to get your data is if you've already taken a 23andMe or an Ancestry or any of the other DNA tests, you can download your raw data from them and you can upload it to our site, and you don't have to swab. We'll translate that and give you a report within 30 seconds. So those are the two ways that you.
Oh, wow. That's fast. And then so what's the average? So really it's.
Oh, I'm sorry. And that's one, that one is $49.95. I apologize.
Okay. All right. And then what if I want you to integrate all of my Fitbit, all of my goodies, and then keep track of me and like help and coach me along with the genomics in the background?
Yeah. We have a subscription service for that. So it starts at $99 a month. And it provides you a biometric device, product, and a concierge service. We also have medical professionals that work with us. So if somebody has a disease, because we cannot have a conversation with somebody that has that, you can speak to a healthcare professional through a telehealth service or platform, and they can provide you some of that information. So all that is included, and there's different pricing models based on the level of support that you would need.
So how often do you find somebody coming in? I just want to get my DNA. I just want my DNA in front. I don't want any more. And then you can move them into more of a subscription model, because I think a lot of people really would benefit from 3 months of somebody talking to them about what their experiences were and then helping them to modify. Is that a transition that a lot of people make after they get the testing?
Yeah, and that's something we learn. Everything we do is a learning experience, because when we first started, we give you the DNA results, we give you everything, and Bob from Iowa is like, okay, now what do I do? Where I get the product? So by adding products, that was really helpful, because when I took my 23andMe, I take every single test there is, all the microbiome tests, all that. So a lot of them are not actionable. Okay, I got the information. What do I do? So we said we're going to make it actionable. The second thing is, we tried apps. We tried every single feedback system you can possibly do. And people are just not receptive to that, especially if somebody's not feeling well, but they took something and they're feeling better. There's no incentive for them to report that. So one of the best ways we found for us to get patient-reported outcome and to really help more people is to offer this concierge service. So we just launched that recently. And what's happening is, you're absolutely right. People are saying, oh man, I can speak to somebody. I can get, if this product isn't working for me that well, I can tweak it. So it gives us baseline, it gives us feedback, and we're getting a lot more information and helping a lot more people that way. So you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, I think that that's a great opportunity for people who need some help. And these genomic things, I've been in practice for 25 years. We keep watching and waiting for, within just general medicine, to have some really powerful results from these tests. A lot of times, people get directed into being so worried that something horrible is going to happen to them, and not really understanding that these markers are just markers. They're just markers. And so much of what can happen to your life, you can impact by every single thing you do every day, just by getting the great sleep and eating properly and, and managing your relationships and having a sense of community. The epigenetics are just as powerful as the genetics.
100%.
So as you're looking at these tests and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I metabolize too quickly. I can't handle all of these things. You just need to remember that all of that is remarkably, amazingly pliant and agile and modifiable. So getting the test is important, but working with a coach who can talk to you about, just finding your great food, like what's the best food that you can eat, what's the best movement that you can do. All of those things will make a night and day difference in your genomic work. But the genomes at the base, the genomic stuff at the base is important too. I always BRCA mutations for breast cancer,
exactly.
Where it increases your risk of breast cancer between 7 and 56% or something. It's like, wait a minute, between 7 and 56%, like what does that mean? That just
I think it's what we talked about before. It's BRCA, but it's plus all these other things. And also, as you mentioned, your lifestyle. So if you have
Right.
this genetic predisposition, it's not a sentence. It just means that you can
Right.
do things to be able, and we tell that to people all the time. That's why I'm saying this is your blueprint. Now do something about that so you don't turn those switches on, the ones that you don't want to turn on, and you turn switches off. And that's your work. So we're encouraging people to say, look at this, but this is not your Bible. It's not fixed. These are all things that you can do to change that. And we're not just about cannabis. We're looking at the entire endocannabinoid system in Q1. We're doing full genome sequencing. So we're going to be able to look at your nutrient deficiencies, which we do now, vitamins, skin, everything. And this is education and important information for individuals to know about themselves so they can take appropriate action. And that's what we encourage.
All of that is a great finish. Thank you so much, Len, for coming on the show. I'm sorry that I beat you up as hard as I did.
Oh, I love it. Please. Thank you. It's just, I like to be challenged, and I really appreciate it. And you made excellent points. So no, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, great. Well, great. I'm glad. So we're still friends?
For sure. Of course.
All right. Well, thank you everyone again for coming to the Dr. Mary Show, the Cannabis Clinicians Lounge, produced in collaboration with the NACB with post-production work through Pro Cannabis Media. Thanks, Dan, for production, and Isabel for scheduling, and of course, always Jimmy Young for just being fabulous, Jimmy Young. And we'll see you again very soon with another great podcast. Good night, everybody.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.